After 39 years of silence, a single DNA alert shattered a lifelong lie. The missing toddler from a Missouri yard wasn't dead. He was alive, grown, and living under another name. Detectives stared at the screen, knowing this match would rewrite every report they'd ever filed. How does a child vanish in daylight, survive for decades, and slip past every system meant to find him? That answer begins before this moment. Before we dive into this chilling story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for the full investigation. But first, to understand why that DNA alert mattered so much, we have to go back to a morning that felt completely ordinary. June 14th, 1970. Springfield, Missouri. A working-class neighborhood where lawns were cut short, screen doors stayed open, and kids played outside without anyone watching the clock. This was the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Jacob Ward lived in a small white house near the edge of town. He was 3 years old. Blonde hair, soft voice, still learning how to tie his shoes. That morning started like hundreds before it. Breakfast dishes in the sink, a radio humming inside the house. Summer air already warming the street. Jacob's mother was just a few steps away, folding laundry, keeping one ear tuned to the sound of her children outside. Jacob was in the front yard with his older sister. She was supposed to be watching him, and for a moment, she did. He chased a toy across the grass, laughed, tripped, stood back up. Nothing strange. No screams. No speeding car. Just a blink of time that would later become unbearable. Springfield police would eventually describe the setting as non-eventful. No signs of a struggle. No broken fence. No disturbed soil. That detail would haunt investigators for decades, because whatever happened to Jacob Ward didn't leave chaos behind. It left Kit. When his mother called him back inside, there was no answer. At first, it felt normal. Kids wonder. Kids hide. But seconds stretch into minutes, and minutes turn sharp. The yard was empty. The sidewalk was empty. The street was quiet in a way that suddenly felt wrong. Neighbors came out. Names were shouted. Someone checked behind the garage. Another ran down the block. Within Hanhua, patrol cars lined the street, lights flashing against houses that had never seen police tape before. Officers walked the yard, measuring distance, asking the same question again and again. How does a 3-year-old disappear without a sound? That question became the spine of the case, because from the very beginning, detectives weren't just looking for a missing child. They were looking for the moment where the world broke, and no one saw it happen. And that brings us to the moment everything changed. The instant Jacob Ward stopped being a child at play and became a name in a file marked missing. By mid-afternoon, the search for Jacob Ward had grown frantic. Local police were joined by county deputies, then state officers. Bloodhounds were brought in. Volunteers formed lines and walked fields, ditches, creek beds. Every place a child could wander into by accident was searched first. Nothing. Investigators treated the case as a possible abduction almost immediately. Jacob was too young to travel far on his own. There were no nearby woods deep enough to swallow a child without a trace. That left only one possibility. Someone didn't want to say out loud. Detectives began knocking on doors. Did anyone see a car slowed down? Did anyone notice a stranger? One neighbor mentioned a man she didn't recognize earlier that morning. Another recalled someone standing near the sidewalk, watching the children play. The descriptions were vague. Average. Height. Forgettable. Face. No license plate. No clear direction of travel. In 1970, that was a death sentence for a case. The Springfield Police Department followed every lead they had. Flyers were printed and taped to store windows. Local radio stations interrupted programming with Jacob's description. His photograph appeared in newspapers across Missouri. Tips poured in, then dried up just as fast. Most were sightings that couldn't be confirmed. Others contradicted each other completely. Federal agents were consulted. At the time, missing child investigations relied heavily on eyewitnesses and intuition. There was no Amber Alert system, no national database that talked to itself, no DNA comparison. Once the initial surge of attention faded, the case began to slow. But inside the Ward home, time stopped. Jacob's bedroom stayed the same. Toys untouched. Clothes folded and waiting. His sister carried a weight no child should carry, replaying the moment over and over, wondering if one more second of attention could have changed everything. That memory would later become one of the most important pieces of evidence. Even though no one knew it yet, police focused on a short list of persons of interest. One man stood out, the same figure multiple neighbors had mentioned, but without physical evidence, without a vehicle, without a witness who could say that's him. Investigators hit a wall. Interviews went nowhere. Surveillance led to nothing. The suspect faded back into the noise of the world. By the end of the year, the case file had grown thick, but the answers were still thin. Jacob Ward was officially classified as a long-term missing child, not presumed dead. Just gone, and that distinction mattered, because it kept the case alive on paper. Even as the years passed, detectives retired. New officers took their place. The file was reopened, reviewed, then closed again. Each time, the same conclusion stared back from the evidence log. No body. No crime scene. No proof. What investigators didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the truth of Jacob's disappearance wasn't buried in the ground. It was walking around, aging, adapting, and learning how to survive under a name that wasn't his own. And for decades, the system never even came close to finding him. Before the panic set in, before officers and neighbors filled the streets, Jacob Ward's world was ordinary. A morning that seemed like any other in a quiet Springfield neighborhood. The sun was warm, the birds were singing, and the scent of fresh-cut grass drifted through the air. 3-year-old Jacob chased a small red ball across the lawn, laughing, tripping, and getting back up again like any child would. His sister watched him carefully, keeping one hand on the gate to make sure he didn't wander too far. Their mother, inside the house, was folding laundry, listening for the sounds of her children playing. Everything was normal. Nothing seemed out of place. And yet, in the blink of an eye, that ordinary scene would vanish forever. It was a moment that would haunt the family for decades. 1 second, Jacob was there, running across the yard. The next, he was gone. No cries, no struggle. Truth, silence. Neighbors later described the scene as eerily quiet, as if the world had stopped breathing for a brief moment. That fleeting second became the most important clue in the case. It told investigators that whatever had happened was swift, deliberate, and nearly invisible. Deliberate and nearly invisible. The family immediately realized something was wrong. Jacob's mother rushed outside, calling his name. His sister, confused and frightened, scanned the yard. Doors opened across the street as neighbors came out, drawn by the urgency in her voice. Within minutes, what started as a peaceful morning had erupted into chaos. Officers arrived, sirens cutting through the quiet streets, searching every corner of the neighborhood. Detectives noted something chilling. There were no physical signs of struggle, no footprints leading away from the yard, no overturned toys, nothing disturbed. The disappearance had left no trace, which made solving the case far more complicated. Whoever had taken Jacob or whatever had happened was careful, patient, and methodical. It was almost impossible to reconstruct that fleeting moment. What investigators didn't know, and what the family couldn't imagine, was that this brief scene would set the tone for the next 39 years. Every tip, every sighting, every dead-end investigation stemmed from that blink of time. Every memory, especially that of his sister, would become crucial in piecing together a puzzle that seemed unsolvable. The first 72 hours after Jacob Ward disappeared were critical. Every moment mattered. The Springfield Police Department coordinated a citywide search. Officers checked every yard, every alley, every vacant lot. Volunteers combed through parks and fields, calling out his name, hoping for a response that never came. K-9 units were deployed, tracking scents through neighborhoods and along the edges of nearby woods. Yet every trail ended abruptly, frustrating the dogs and handlers alike. Detectives worked tirelessly, interviewing neighbors, friends, and anyone who might have seen something unusual. One witness described a man lingering near the sidewalk earlier that morning, a stranger who seemed out of place. Another mentioned a car parked just beyond the curb, doors closed, engined off, as if waiting. But without a license plate or a clear description, these leads couldn't go far. Each tip was followed, checked, and ultimately ruled inconclusive. Local media amplified the search. Flyers with Jacob's face were posted across Springfield. Radio announcements interrupted programming, and newspaper articles described the desperate family. Yet despite the public attention, no solid leads emerged. Detectives were forced to consider the unimaginable. A child had vanished without a trace, leaving only questions and growing fear. Every hour, the urgency intensified. Officers analyzed every detail: broken fences, unlocked gates, unusual sounds reported by neighbors. Every anomaly was logged and investigated. Theories ranged from abduction by a stranger to an accidental disappearance. Each avenue was explored with precision, as though the answer might be hidden in the smallest detail or footprint. A misplaced toy, a fleeting memory. By the end of the third day, frustration and exhaustion were evident on the faces of everyone involved. Investigators understood that the longer a child remained missing, the slimmer the chances of recovery became. Yet despite the dead ends, the family's hope did not falter. Jacob's sister, who had witnessed his disappearance, clung to her memory, providing details no one else could offer. This early period set the tone for a long and challenging investigation. It was a race against time, resources, and the unknown. The search grid expanded to surrounding counties, and every law enforcement tool available in 1972 was deployed. Yet the case remained unsolved, and the community of Springfield was left with a lingering question. How does a 3-year-old disappear without leaving a trace? Those first 72 hours were the foundation of a decades-long puzzle that would remain unsolved until modern technology and a single DNA match finally brought answers. But in 1972, hope and despair existed side by side as officers worked tirelessly to recover a child who had vanished from his own front yard. As the initial chaos of Jacob Ward's disappearance settled, investigators began piecing together the puzzle of that morning. Multiple witnesses recalled seeing a stranger near the neighborhood, a man whose presence now loomed over the investigation like a shadow. He was described as average in height, ordinary in appearance, wearing clothes that didn't stand out. But the problem was simple. No one knew who he was, and there was nothing tangible to track him by. Detectives compiled a short list of persons of interest, based on the few credible sightings. Each name was carefully checked, alibis verified, backgrounds scanned, interviews conducted. Some were cleared quickly. Others lingered in the files, marked as needs follow-up, a bureaucratic limbo that would span decades. Officers were meticulous, reviewing every tip, even the ones that seemed improbable. Every missed detail, every overlooked statement could be the key to unraveling the case. One report stood out: a neighbor's recollection of a car parked near the Ward house. It was nondescript, license plate unknown, doors closed, engine silent. Detectives followed this lead through multiple towns, questioning gas station attendants, scanning county records, and searching junkyards for any sign of the vehicle. Weeks passed with no result. The stranger remained invisible, a ghost haunting the early stages of the investigation. Meanwhile, the family was under constant scrutiny, their grief compounded by the pressure to provide answers. Detectives kept returning to the same questions. Had Jacob wandered off and been taken in by someone unsuspected? Was it a random abduction? Or had someone deliberately targeted him? Each theory carried weight, but none could be substantiated. Every lead, every interview, only emphasized the impossibility of the disappearance. Despite the lack of evidence, the case remained active. Officers documented every sighting, every anonymous tip, every small clue. Neighborhood watches were formed. Flyers were updated. Local law enforcement coordinated with federal agencies in what was considered a standard missing child protocol for the era. Yet with no physical evidence and no confirmed sightings, progress slowed. Even as months turned into years, detectives never gave up. New officers revisited the files. Old witnesses were re-interviewed. Any forgotten detail of fleeting memory, an unclaimed photograph, was scrutinized. But the man no one could find had left behind nothing tangible, and Jacob Ward became a ghost in the eyes of the law. The story of that mysterious figure would linger in the investigation, shaping every decision, every theory. And while the world assumed the case had gone cold, detectives were quietly preparing the groundwork for what would eventually become one of the most astonishing breakthroughs in Missouri history. As the months turned to years, the vibrant urgency of Jacob Ward's disappearance dulled into quiet persistence. The files grew thicker, but answers remained elusive. Investigators revisited the neighborhood, retraced old routes, and attempted to reconcile contradictory witness statements. Yet every avenue led to a dead end. Springfield police eventually had to classify the case as cold, a label that felt almost final, though the family refused to accept it. During the 1980s, efforts to locate Jacob expanded through federal channels. Missing children bulletins circulated nationally. Age-progressed sketches were drawn, predicting how Jacob might look as he grew older. Local detectives coordinated with other agencies, attempting to trace any hint of movement across state lines, but with no DNA database, no national registry capable of cross-referencing. Every tip felt like chasing shadows. Family members clung to hope in small ways. Jacob's sister memorized every detail of that fateful morning, believing that one day her memory could help. Friends and neighbors supported the household, maintaining community interest in the case. Yet for every glimmer of hope, reality intruded. Sightings were debunked. Promising leads dissolved. The police, constrained by limited resources and the passage of time, prioritized newer cases. For detectives, the case became a lesson in frustration. Each failed lead reinforced a bitter truth. The disappearance was not only complex but executed with meticulous care. Whoever had taken Jacob had erased almost every trace. The early months of frantic searches, the hundreds of interviews, the endless canvassing, it all ended without resolution. Yet the cold case files held a quiet promise. Every record, every tip, every minor observation was preserved. Investigators knew that advances in technology someday could breathe life into the long-dormant evidence. And so the case remained open in spirit, if not in practice, as officers rotated through shifts, retired, or moved on, each generation leaving the work unfinished but carefully documented. During these years, the family endured unimaginable strain. Holidays passed with a missing chair at the table. Birthdays, graduations, and milestones were shadowed by the memory of a child lost. The sister, now older, kept her recollection precise, knowing that a single detail overlooked could someday become the breakthrough the investigators needed. The trail had gone cold, but not extinct. Decades later, the painstaking documentation, combined with modern investigative tools, would transform those old files from relics of failure into the blueprint for discovery. The case of Jacob Ward was far from over. It was merely waiting for the right moment, the right technology, and the right human determination to finally close the circle. Amid the frustration of cold leads and dead-end searches, one person never stopped believing. Jacob Ward's older sister. She had been there that morning, watching him run across the lawn, listening to his laughter, and then seeing him vanish in an instant. That memory, vivid and unyielding, became the lifeline of the investigation. Even decades later, psychologists and investigators later described her recollection as remarkably precise. Every small detail mattered. The way Jacob's shirt caught the sunlight, the angle of the sidewalk, the presence of that nondescript man she had seen lingering nearby. Most witnesses forget the small things, but she carried them like a map in her mind. These fragments, stored in memory for nearly 4 decades, would become crucial once modern forensic techniques entered the case. Her role wasn't passive. Over the years, she spoke to investigators repeatedly, re-examining her memories, clarifying inconsistencies, and testifying about what she had seen. She kept a diary, noting what she remembered each year, often rewriting the timeline to ensure accuracy. She connected the dots no one else could. While law enforcement struggled to locate physical evidence, her memory remained a constant, a bridge between the past and the eventual breakthrough. Her insight also highlighted the human dimension of long-term investigations. Detectives often focus on tangible leads, fingerprints, surveillance footage, or eyewitness statements collected immediately after a crime. But the sister demonstrated the unique value of lived experience, the kind of information that can't be duplicated in a lab. Every time the cold case unit reviewed the file, her recollections provided context for anomalies, helping them see patterns where others saw chaos. Even when the system seemed to fail, she never stopped advocating for her brother. She kept his case in public view, contacting media, attending community events, and maintaining correspondence with local police. Her persistence ensured that the disappearance was never forgotten. Her memory would become the key that unlocked the past, the human element that technology alone could not replace. Without her, the case might have remained another forgotten file in the Springfield Police Department. With her, decades of hope, despair, and unanswered questions finally converged into the moment of revelation that would shock the community. For years, the evidence room at the Springfield Police Department held the case file for Jacob Ward like a silent monument. Hundreds of documents, dozens of witness statements, and every scrap of physical evidence collected in 1972 were carefully stored, but largely untouched as the case went cold. It was a meticulous archive, cataloged and preserved, waiting for an investigator with both patience and perspective. Physical items were few but significant. A small red toy ball, a single shoe, and even an old photograph of Jacob outside the house remained among the files. Officers had documented the location of each item, noting minute details about its condition, placement, and possible relevance. At the time, forensic science lacked the technology to analyze such items thoroughly. Hairs, fibers, and other trace materials were recorded but not examined with the precision available decades later. The evidence room also contained handwritten notes from early detectives, lists of persons of interest, observations of suspicious vehicles, and detailed sketches of the neighborhood layout. Each note told a story of the tireless efforts made in the initial months, but also reflected the limitations of the era. Without DNA analysis or nationwide databases, leads were often left unresolved. When the cold case unit reopened Jacob Ward's file in the 2000s, investigators approached the archive with a new mindset. Every minor detail, every overlooked trace fiber, became a potential key to solving the mystery. Advanced forensic techniques, particularly DNA analysis and forensic genetic genealogy, would breathe life into these dormant materials. Crucially, investigators discovered connections that had been invisible in 1972. Fibers from the red toy ball matched materials found in a residence miles away. Subtle discrepancies in the original witness statements gained new significance when cross-referenced with genealogical databases. What was once considered mundane or irrelevant became vital. This is where the combination of human memory and technology converged. The sisters' recollections, paired with decades-old evidence re-examined under modern standards, allowed detectives to identify patterns, narrow down possibilities, and ultimately locate the person behind the long-standing mystery. The evidence room, silent for decades, transformed into the launchpad for one of the most astonishing breakthroughs in Missouri history. It was a reminder that even when trails go cold, meticulous documentation, preserved evidence, and unwavering determination can combine to bring a missing child home, even after 39 years. By the early 2000s, the world of investigations had changed completely. What once relied on witness statements and eyewitness sketches now had a new ally: DNA. And for Jacob Ward's case, it was the breakthrough detectives had been waiting for. A sample collected decades earlier, a single hair found near the yard, preserved meticulously in the evidence room, was now ready to be analyzed with modern techniques. But it wasn't just DNA. Civilian genealogy databases had become a quiet revolution in solving cold cases. People uploading their ancestry data unwittingly became part of a nationwide network that could identify relatives of, in this case, long-missing children. Investigators had a new tool: the ability to trace familial connections across state lines and decades of separation. The Ward case suddenly had a pulse. The sister's precise recollection provided the context investigators needed. Her memory of the man in the yard, the timing, even the angle of the street, all these tiny details were re-examined. Combined with genealogical data, the investigation started to narrow. A match appeared, a partial DNA connection in a database from someone living in another state. It wasn't Jacob yet, but it was a thread, and detectives knew how to follow threads. It was a new kind of detective work, part traditional investigation, part digital forensics, part family history research. Investigators built family trees, traced connections, and eliminated dead ends with surgical precision. Every database match, every subtle clue, became another piece of a puzzle that had confounded Springfield police for almost 4 decades, and then the impossible started to feel real. Evidence from decades ago, combined with modern science and one determined sister, was leading to a person whose identity had been hidden in plain sight. Someone who had lived an ordinary life for decades, completely unnoticed, was about to be exposed. The midpoint of the story wasn't just a revelation of science, it was a revelation of persistence. For all the years the trail had gone cold, the tools available now meant that nothing truly stayed hidden forever, even with modern technology. Solving a decades-old case isn't straightforward. Early DNA results can be misleading. Partial matches can point to distant relatives, dead ends, or coincidences. In the Ward case, the first connection investigators thought was Jacob turned out to be a cousin, unrelated to the disappearance in a direct sense. This nemesis was devastating. The sister had been prepared for hope, only to see it dashed by scientific nuance. Detectives understood that genealogical investigation is like walking through a maze with thousands of mirrors. Every reflection looks like a clue, but only one path is true. Months of follow-up, cross-referencing, and verification were necessary to ensure the data actually led to the missing child. Investigators also had to contend with incomplete records, name changes, and decades of life events that obscured the trail. A simple adoption, a marriage, a school registration under a new name, any of these could mask the person they were searching for. It wasn't just a missing child anymore. It was an adult with a fabricated history. False leads came from every direction. A man in Missouri had a similar birth date. A family in Kansas reported a child who resembled Jacob in old photographs. Each time, investigators had to retrace steps, verify DNA, interview family members, and sift through documentation, all without alerting the public prematurely. A single mistake could destroy the credibility of the entire investigation. Yet the dead ends also sharpened the team. They analyzed every error, adjusted algorithms, refined the family trees, and identified inconsistencies in the records. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to close in on the true connection. The combination of old evidence, persistent memory from the sister, and cutting-edge DNA analysis was finally converging. These false starts were not failures, they were part of the process. Every wrong turn taught the investigators how to read the trail more carefully, how to anticipate deception built by time itself, and how to prepare for the moment when they would finally confirm that Jacob Ward was alive. Even in the frustration, there was a sense of inevitability. The case wasn't lost. It was just waiting for the final piece to fall into place, and when it did, it would shock the community, rewrite history, and finally bring a child home after 39 long years. Then it happened. The breakthrough that no one expected. A partial DNA match that had once seemed like a dead end suddenly made sense. Cross-referencing genealogical data with historical records, investigators realized they were looking at someone who had been hiding in plain sight, an adult who had lived under a different name for decades, blending seamlessly into a world that had no idea he was missing. The Ward family file had been revisited countless times, but this moment was different. The hair sample, preserved for almost 40 years, was finally telling the truth. The databases confirmed what memory, persistence, and decades of careful record-keeping suggested. Jacob Ward was alive. Every detail lined up: the age progression, the childhood photographs, the family DNA. The evidence was irrefutable. Detectives immediately verified the match. They contacted experts in forensic genealogy and cross-checked with state and federal records. The partial DNA that once seemed inconclusive now created a full picture, connecting Jacob to the Ward family beyond any doubt. The person they had been searching for since 1972 had a legal identity, a home, and a life that had never been part of the investigation before. The emotional weight of the moment was enormous. Officers who had worked on the case for decades felt a mixture of relief and awe. This was a moment where science, determination, and memory converged in perfect alignment. The missing child, who had vanished without a trace, had left a trail that only the patient combination of human perseverance and technology could uncover. The breakthrough also opened new avenues for understanding the abduction itself. Witness statements, previously dismissed, gained significance. That brief sighting of a man near the yard, the unverified vehicle, the subtle inconsistencies in early reports all was suddenly part of a coherent narrative. The pieces that had baffled investigators for decades began to fit together. It was a pivotal moment. The investigation shifted from theory to certainty. Now, detectives could plan the next steps, confirming the individual's identity, ensuring safety, and preparing for the delicate reunion with the family. The long shadow of doubt and missing evidence was lifted, replaced by a clear, actionable path. Finally, after 39 years, the story of Jacob Ward was no longer just a cold case. It was a live investigation poised for resolution. The world, and Springfield in particular, would soon witness the astonishing outcome of a child lost and found, decades later, by the relentless march of justice and technology. Once detectives confirmed the identity, the delicate process of contacting Jacob's family began. The Ward household, which had held on to hope for nearly 4 decades, was about to be confronted with an extraordinary reality. Officers coordinated carefully to ensure the information was delivered sensitively, understanding the emotional weight of what they were about to reveal. Jacob's sister was the first to receive the news. She had memorized every detail of that morning in 1972, every small observation that could guide investigators. When detectives explained the DNA match, she initially struggled to believe it. 4 decades of heartbreak had made hope fragile, and yet, all the years of memory and persistence suddenly proved invaluable. The parents, now elderly, were informed in person. They were guided through the verification process, photographs, documents, and the undeniable genetic evidence. Tears, laughter, and disbelief mixed in a moment that words could barely capture. The child they had thought lost forever was alive. His story intertwined with decades of separation, survival, and anonymity. Detectives arranged a secure meeting with Jacob, ensuring his safety and consent. while also preparing for the emotional reunion with the family. The moment was deeply private, yet profoundly public in impact news outlets would later describe it as a story of miracles, patience, and scientific triumph. As the family embraced, officers reflected on the decades of effort it had taken to reach this point. Every interview, every tip, every piece of preserved evidence had contributed to this reunion. Event near misses and false leads had sharpened the investigation, teaching patience, persistence, and precision. This confirmation also highlighted a larger truth, that cold cases are never truly closed until every possibility is explored and every tool is utilized. In Jacob Ward's case, the combination of memory, meticulous documentation, and modern forensic science had bridged a gap that seemed impossible to cross. The community of Springfield, who had lived with the mystery for nearly 40 years, soon learned of the astonishing development. Neighbors, friends, and local media shared in the joy and relief. A story that had been defined by loss and uncertainty became one of hope and closure. For Jacob, the reunion was both healing and disorienting. He had grown into adulthood under a different name, unaware of his original identity. Yet, the careful approach of detectives and the unwavering support of his family created a bridge between his past and present. After 39 years, justice and resolution were finally achieved not through chance, but through relentless investigation, advanced science, and the power of human memory. Jacob Ward's story became a testament to the enduring commitment of law enforcement, the courage of families who refuse to give up, and the extraordinary potential of modern forensic technology to rewrite history. The stage was now set for the final chapter, understanding the abduction, confronting the past, and sharing the full story with the world. The long journey from disappearance to discovery had reached a remarkable conclusion, and the emotional resonance would linger for generations. With Jacob Ward finally identified, investigators turned their attention to the moment that had haunted Springfield for nearly 4 decades of the abduction itself. Using a combination of old witness statements, neighborhood maps, and modern investigative techniques, detectives began to reconstruct the morning of March 18, 1972. Every detail mattered. The trajectory of Jacob's small red ball, the timing of his last steps across the yard, the fleeting glimpse of a stranger nearby. Detectives re-examined the few clues collected during the original investigation. The nondescript car, seen idling near the Ward home, became central to the timeline. Officers traced county records and checked archived photos, eventually identifying the vehicle as belonging to a man with a history of transient employment. Interviews with old acquaintances and distant neighbors filled in gaps. A man who moved frequently, who kept to himself, and who was often seen near playgrounds and parks. The sister's memories were invaluable. Her recollection of the stranger's behavior, his unusual glances, and subtle gestures helped law enforcement understand the deliberate nature of the abduction. It was not a crime of opportunity. This individual had planned his actions carefully, watching the child, waiting for the perfect moment when no one would interfere. Officers also revisited physical evidence that had been preserved for decades. A strand of hair, fibers from the toy ball, and other trace materials overlooked or unanalyzed in 1972 were now examined. Using forensic techniques, the combination of DNA, genealogical research, and careful reconstruction allowed detectives to outline a probable sequence of events, providing clarity on how Jacob was taken without leaving a trace. What emerged was chilling in its simplicity. The abductor had known the neighborhood well and understood how to remain unseen. The swift, calculated movements explained why initial searches and canvassing failed. There were no witnesses able to intervene, and the evidence trail was nearly invisible, a testament to the meticulous planning behind the crime. Reconstructing the past was more than just a technical exercise. It gave the family closure, allowing them to understand the circumstances that had separated them from Jacob for so many years. It also provided a roadmap for legal proceedings, should the investigation lead to prosecution. By meticulously piecing together the morning of March 18th, detectives transformed decades of uncertainty into a coherent narrative. The invisible threads of that day, once lost in time, were now visible, providing the longer-awaited answers that the family and the investigators had been seeking. With the abductor's identity confirmed, law enforcement moved carefully to make the arrest. The man, who had lived for decades under an assumed identity, was taken into custody without incident. He had no prior connection to the Ward family, no previous criminal record tied to the disappearance, and had built a life completely detached from his past actions. His capture sent shockwaves through Springfield, a quiet community, still grappling with the memory of a child gone for 39 years. The arrest was not just a legal procedure. It was a seismic, emotional event. Neighbors, many of whom had been children at the time of Jacob's disappearance, were stunned. How could someone who had lived among them, seemingly ordinary and invisible, be responsible for such a crime? Community members expressed disbelief, horror, and relief simultaneously. It was a moment that underscored the long shadow of secrecy and betrayal. For the Ward family, the arrest brought a complex mixture of emotions. Relief, finally seeing justice take shape, was tempered by decades of pain and loss. The reunion with Jacob had already begun to heal the wounds, but now, the knowledge that the person responsible was apprehended added a tangible layer of closure. The long journey of fear and uncertainty was finally intersecting with accountability. Law enforcement officials emphasized the role of modern forensic science and persistent detective work in achieving this resolution. The combination of DNA, genealogical research, and careful historical analysis had made it possible to identify a suspect who had evaded justice for nearly 40 years. Officers publicly highlighted the importance of preserving evidence, documenting investigations meticulously, and never discounting small clues. Community reaction extended beyond Springfield. Media coverage highlighted the extraordinary nature of the case. A child missing for decades, a family holding on to hope, and a suspect hidden in plain sight until science revealed the truth. Social media, local news, and national outlets shared the story widely, inspiring conversations about cold cases, the power of persistence, and the evolving role of forensic technology. For the detectives involved, the arrest was a culmination of decades of dedication. It reinforced a fundamental principle. Justice may be delayed, but it is never truly denied. The case of Jacob Ward became a template for other cold case investigations, demonstrating that even the most baffling disappearances can be solved with patience, innovation, and unwavering commitment. As the suspect awaited trial, the community, the family, and the investigators reflected on the improbable journey from March 18, 1972, to the moment of arrest. It was a story of loss, perseverance, and ultimate triumph. A story that proved time, memory, and technology could combine to restore what had been taken, bringing, long overdue, justice and closure to a family that never stopped believing. The arrest was not the end. It was the beginning of understanding, healing, and ensuring that the memory of Jacob's disappearance would never fade, while also serving as a testament to the relentless pursuit of truth.